The submit handler for this form is pretty straightforward. We get a new ID, we create a new to-do using the current to-do value on the state, and we add it to the list. The submit handler does nothing about empty values though, so I can come into the form and I can press enter a bunch of times, and it's going to generate to-dos with no name each time. This behavior isn't what we want, so we should add some validation to the form. So I could come into this handle submit form and I could say if this dot state dot current to do, and I could move all of this code into that, and then I could add an else statement, and then add a bunch of logic in here to handle the validation and updating the state to show an error message. And now I basically have a function that's twice as long and has two very different concerns. Since we're updating the current to-do value each time the value of the input changes, we know if the form is valid or not before the form ever gets submitted. So we can use that to our advantage and avoid having this ugly conditional code in our form submit handler. So I'm going to put this back the way it was, and let's see how we can move the handling of an invalid form into its own function. So I'm going to drop down under handle submit, and I'm going to create a new method called handle empty submit. It's going to take an event, just like the other one, and I'm going to call event.prevent default. And if this method gets called, it means you're trying to submit an empty to-do, or a to-do without a name. So I'm going to call this .set state, and I'm going to add an error message to the state, and we'll just make that say, please supply a to-do name. So now that we have that defined, let's go down to the render method. And before our return statement, I'm going to create a new constant, and I'm going to call it submit handler. And I'm going to set this to equal a ternary, where I'm going to say this dot state dot current to do. And if that's truthy, it's going to be this dot handle submit. Otherwise, we're going to set submit handler to be this dot handle empty submit. And then I'm going to come down here to where I'm passing this dot handle submit into the to do form, and I'm going to update it to use whatever value submit handler is assigned at the moment. And in order for our handle empty submit method to work, we're going to need to come up here to our constructor and make sure it has the correct bindings. And with that in place, I can save the file, and we'll take a look at how this works in the browser. So we'll take a look at React DevTools, and I'm going to expand this out. I'm going to find my to-do form component, and we'll see that it has a handle submit property that's bound to handle empty submit. That's because we have no value in here. So as soon as I add a value, that binding is going to change to handle submit. That binding will stay put as long as I have content in current to do. But if I back that out, my binding will change back to handle empty submit. So now we can take a look at the props and our state in our top level app component. And if I go to the form and I try to submit an empty to do, we'll see that our state is updated and it now has the error message that we specified in our handle empty submit method. So let's update our render method to show our error message. So scroll down to render, and right inside this to do app div, I'm going to throw in some curly braces, and I'm going to reference this .state.error message. And if that's true, I'm just going to use the double ampersand here. So if it evaluates to true, it'll then evaluate the statement that comes after it. So I'm going to add a span with a class name of error. And in that span, I'm just going to display this .state.error message. And I'll save that. And I'll go over here and I'll try to submit an empty form, and we'll see that the error message is displayed. Now let's make it stand out a little bit better by defining this error class that we gave it in the span. So I'll open up app.css, and down at the bottom I'll just define error and I'll make that text red. I'll give that a save. And we'll see that it's updated right in place in the browser and everything works. The only problem with our current setup is once I'm showing an error message and I put in a valid entry and submit it, the submission will work, but the error message hangs around. So I'm going to come back over here to app.js, and in my handle submit, I'm just going to update this call to set state to set the error message value to an empty string. And now an invalid submission will show the error message, but a valid one will add the new value and hide the error message.